At 8 a.m. on a cold and cloudy mid-December day, an Emeryville boat captain named Mick Menegaz got a call. A fisherman 18 miles outside of the Golden Gate had noticed that a whale seemed to be in trouble. And so Mick invited a few of his dive buddies, including Tim Young and James Mosquito, and they decided to go out to investigate. James's significant other, Holly, also went with them, and as they passed under the Golden Gate Bridge, she said, "There was nothing but the horizon in front of us." In those vast spaces, she did not think that there would be any chance that they would find the whale. But 18 miles further, after the land had receded behind them, they noticed seagulls at first, and they noticed a few crab traps. When they got a lot closer, they saw a 6-inch above the water slice of whale, just the sliver of the whale's back. So Tim and James got into an inflatable boat, and they came about 200 feet in front of the whale, but every time the whale would come up to breathe, the water the whale displaced would kind of push them back. And so the two of them didn't even use words. They just looked at each other and they dove in. And at first, they're diving through so much skin and whale blubber, they had a hard time seeing. And as they came closer, at around 20 feet, they could see it. This whale was as big as a school bus. A female humpback whale is 50 feet long and weighs 50 tons. And what they saw was so disheartening because her body was bent into the shape of the letter C. She had whale traps and crab traps and 2,000 pounds of rope on her. Rope was everywhere. Rope was over her mouth, her head, across her eye, back. It was wrapped around her pectoral fin. And the divers just looked at this mess, and they just concluded that there was no hope for this whale. One said, "I was looking at a dead whale, only the whale didn't know it yet." Now, to make matters worse, the whale doesn't like them coming near, right? So the whale has a 15-foot long, 4-foot wide pectoral fin, and it raises it into the air and brings it crashing down like right near one of the divers' heads. And so the divers kind of retreat, and they give the whale a chance to kind of recuperate. The whale is struggling to breathe because it's being dragged down to the bottom by all that weight. But they come back out, and they begin with 6-inch long dive knives. And one says that the whale's eye was the most amazing thing. It's the size of a grapefruit. And as he swam over here, the whale would, so that you could see the pupil of the eye move, and as the whale moved, you could see the eye move over here as he went back and forth at his work. Now, it was long work, took a lot of hours, and they were cutting the rope, and sometimes it meant that they had to dig into the whale, like the whale's blubber, the skin, in order to cut the rope. It was hard work, and it was very difficult work. It's because they cut one rope and other ropes would get tighter. And finally, though, they got to the last rope and they cut it. And one of them said it was surreal watching the tangle of ropes and crab traps descend into the abyss. And in an instant, the whale was gone. So the guys all came to the surface and they're high-fiving each other and they're exhausted, but they're feeling overjoyed. A sense of wonder and amazement. And then one of them looks down and sees the whale coming at him, full speed, like in the movie Jaws. The whale's coming up, and the whale stops within like a foot of his chest and then pushes him back. And then he kind of recovers and pushes him back again. And then the whale comes above the water, and the whale's eye is 18 inches away from his head, looking at him for 30 seconds and letting him just touch her skin. The diver said, in the presence of something that great, it makes you feel small. It's a very emotional feeling, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. And then the whale went off to the next diver, and did the exact same thing. And then it went to the next, and to the next, and to the next. Now, it was going to be dark soon. It was getting to be dusk. And the water was like the surface of a glass. And they had to leave the whale, even though she didn't want to leave them. Every year, the cathedral has a theme. And our theme this year is the year of connection. In the boat crew's lives, one of the most powerful connections to the transcendent simply would never have happened if they had not said yes to that invitation early on that morning. On the first days of the week, in the depths of dawn, the women who follow Jesus, they also say yes. They come to the tomb and they find the stone rolled away, and coming in, they do not find Jesus' body. Instead, they find two men. Last night, Bishop Mark talked about it. I was wondering if that word was the star word. So Bishop Mark said that the word in Greek that you use for that is shining forth, like the way stars release energy. That's what the angels look like. And so the women are so afraid, they fall flat on their faces, and the angels say to them, they said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" And after this has happened, the women go back to the rest of the disciples, and no one believes them, except Peter, who, I don't know whether he believed or not, but he got up and he ran to the tomb, saw the clothes lying on the ground, and went home amazed by what had happened. Now, although they'd been with Jesus for so many years, although they heard him teach every single day, Jesus' friends respond to the resurrection in exactly the same way that we do. They did not really believe it. They have doubts about what happened. One of my favorite things about reading Greek is this. You skip over words in English that are kind of no big deal, but in Greek you kind of stop and look at them. They seem strange. And one of the words that I noticed this week in this passage, it occurs twice, is also a word that I noticed in another important event that I had. My friend Patrick, sitting in the front row, just raise your hand, Patrick. There you go. That's maybe a little higher. So Patrick was sworn in as a Superior Court judge this week. On Maundy Thursday. Yes. When they swore him in, I wanted to say, justice has prevailed. But as Patrick was standing there and giving an extraordinary, just a description of what his ministry is going to be in the court, behind him is the Great Seal of California. And you're familiar with the view. It's like looking from the Berkeley Hills through the Golden Gate, and there's a big bear on the corner, and there's a miner digging a hole. And the state motto that was put on the state seal in 1849, the same year as this congregation was founded, is simple. It's one word, Eureka. And in Greek, it means, I have found it. And that's what I noticed this week in reading the Bible. The Greek word heurisko, which is the Greek word for to find, appears 167 times in the New Testament. And I have no idea. I just hadn't paid attention to how much of the Bible is about finding something. And I looked it up in my Greek New Testament, and one of the Greek New Testaments says this. It defines it as this: to be in a state which has not been anticipated. Well, isn't that just where we've been for the last 3 years, isn't it? We found ourselves in a pandemic world that we just did not anticipate, and it disrupted every aspect of our lives. And today, we gather near the end of this ordeal, not really sure yet of what happened, or even if this is really the end of it. Now, in the last decades, in America, an idea has been gathering power. And it is the idea that we are merely bits of matter inhabiting a dead universe. The theologian David Bentley Hart puts it in this way. He writes that this governing picture of nature as an aggregate of mechanistic functions and systems accidentally arranged out of inherently lifeless and purposeless elements remains the frame in which we organize our expectations of science and consequently of reality. This picture of a dead universe makes it hard for us to find God. Now, Hart argues that science is a method, not itself a truth. It works very well when making observations in narrowly defined experiments, but it cannot give us a true picture of the world. It cannot answer all of our questions. There are forms of truth that it cannot approach. We will not be able to find ourselves in that picture. And so on this Easter day, I encourage you to be the sort of person who seeks and finds. I want you to live like the women who went to the tomb, like Peter who ran to see for himself. Callistus Ware writes, "It is not the task of Christianity to provide easy answers to every question, but to make us progressively more aware of a mystery. God is not so much the object of our knowledge as the cause of our wonder." Now, about 2 weeks ago, I received the most wonderful email from my seminary professor, Margaret Miles. She was my history professor 30 years ago. And she's so dear to me. I love her so much. She's like a kind of mother to me. And she was writing about what she noticed about my sermons. She watches them online. And she's an expert on St. Augustine, the 3rd century Christian saint. And she said that as she's getting older and as she's approaching her own death, she sees St. Augustine in a totally different way than when she was young. She says that St. Augustine really became more humble, more compassionate, less authoritative, less sure of himself and of the rules as he got older. And as he got very old, his message was simply this, that God is love. Now, St. Augustine also doesn't write very much about his mystical experiences. But there is one time in his book Confessions when he writes about his last experience with his mother, the last time he saw her alive. And he felt like she was the one who gave birth to him physically, and she was also the one who gave birth to him spiritually. She is the one who taught him about God. And he writes about the two of them sitting in a window together. They're looking out the window into a garden. And the two of them had been traveling for a very long distance on land, and so they're very tired, and they're preparing for a sea journey. And they're talking, and they're so connected and so close to each other. It's an example of that love that I felt when I was talking to my teacher, Margaret Miles. He writes that forgetting those things which are behind, so not just talking about the history, but even at this time when his mother's near death, reaching forth into those things which are before. And we were discussing the truth, O God, which you are. Augustine goes on. He says, our talk reached this point that the greatest possible delights of our bodily senses, radiant as they might be with the brightest corporal light, could not be compared with the joys of that eternal life. And then we raised ourselves higher, and step by step, passed over all material things, even the heaven itself from which the sun and moon and stars shine down upon the earth. We came to our own souls, and we went beyond our souls to reach that wisdom by whom all things are made. And as we talked, yearning toward this wisdom, we did just lightly come into touch with her. Now, for the first time in 3 years, It's an amazing thing. We haven't been together like this for 3 years. We have boys in the choir. We have like 3 boys, right, who sang Easter before. Raise your hand if you sang an Easter before. Yeah, 4, 5. 5 boys who've ever even done this service before. And for the first time, we are gathering in person, and we are gathering in the presence of something great. And yet, we still have not been made whole. The tragedies that we see around us in Ukraine, having to do with the pandemic, the examples we see of injustice, poverty, and the destruction of the natural world. These, they wrap around us, bending us, threatening to drown us in the abyss. Do not be captivated by the prevailing idea that there is nothing ahead but the horizon, that we inhabit a world without spirit. Let the love of Jesus cut the ropes that bind you. Let your life be touched by the wisdom of love. Say yes to God. Find your connection to the mystery that transcends us.